My name is Krista Hopp. I'm an executive function, ADHD, and academic coach and owner of Connected Pathways Coaching. And I welcome everyone tonight to Preparing and Surviving Distance Learning. A little bit about myself. I used to previously work with a research project where I worked under a neuropsychologist and did neuropsych testing with kids that were ages 3, 6, and 9. And one of the things that I've noticed during that time was that I was hearing from a lot of parents that their kids did not have any disabilities. They weren't diagnosed with anything, but they were struggling in school. They were having difficulties where they would do homework, but they would lose it or they would forget about it. They had difficulty understanding directions and just really were organized. And so it was then that I realized I really wanted to open a coaching practice that was going to be there to help anyone who had executive function challenges. And we all have executive function strengths and weaknesses. So about 6 years ago, I opened the practice, and we realized last spring that a lot of people were struggling. And so over the summer, we wanted to make sure that we took the time to develop this webinar and also develop some other things. But let me have Christine introduce herself.
Hi everybody, I'm Christine Shiverick. I'm out in north central Wisconsin, and I have a background in special education and a master's in early childhood education. I got into coaching because of my son. When we lived in Boston, there were a lot of resources available for him. And once we moved out to north central Wisconsin, I realized that there just weren't as many resources available. So I looked into coaching, and I've been coaching for 6 years. I'm an ADHD, executive function, and academic coach, and own Able Coaching for ADHD.
Maria, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, my name is Maria Puglisi Stefkovic. I have 4 children. They're all teens, 3 in high school and 1 we sent off to college. Hopefully he'll get to enjoy staying there for a while in these times. 2 of my children have a diagnosis of ADHD, and which is how and why I got interested in executive functions. And as I explored, I became more fascinated and interested in learning about it and wanted to coach and help others. So I certified as a life ADHD and executive function coach. And I'm also an academic coach working with Krista and Christine. Right now, I'm mainly working with middle schoolers and high schoolers.
Krista, your volume is really low.
Okay, is that better?
A little bit. Something's changed.
Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. So one of the things that we realized in the spring as parents and as coaches is that it was tough. It was tough for everybody. And we wanted to make sure, when we highly suspected that we were going to start off virtual this year, that we came together as an agency and we wanted to really help those in the community. That was really important to us because we saw how parents and students were really struggling in the spring. And so our mission here is really to help families with skills that set them up for success. And so we wanted to extend that this year with the pandemic. A webinar was one place that we could start by doing this. And so one of the questions that we were hearing a lot from parents were like, how do I do distance learning when I'm not a teacher? And so we thought we would start there. Like, how do we survive distance learning when you're not trained as a teacher? So wanted to ask some questions before we get started. Did you find yourself in the spring being a little bit concerned because your child was struggling because they were unable to see their friends? They might have been, even depressed or anxious, but definitely sad because they couldn't be with their friends. Did you find yourself thinking that your child was completing work only to find out that they weren't? Or did you kind of see them struggle along the way to get that work completed? And are you a little worried about skills regressing, like study skills? And simply, are you concerned about being overwhelmed and juggling it all? And those were the things that we kind of thought about when we created this webinar. And so we wanted to make sure that we were going to help provide you with some solutions that can help with distance learning. So If you stay until the end, as a special thanks, what we're going to do is provide you with a distance learning tip sheet, as well as some resources that we're introducing throughout the webinar, a trigger tracker, as well as the Get Ready, Do, and Done planner that you will be receiving training on in this webinar, or introduced to. So we realize that some of you are here because your child is starting off with distance learning and you want to survive it. And some of you might be starting with the hybrid and thinking, yeah, eventually we're going to go into distance learning. I know in our area, we found out that one of the big colleges today sent home kids. So we have a lot of students that are going from distance learning to hybrid, or possibly, hopefully, or hybrid to distance learning. And so we're going to kind of base it on distance learning throughout this, but understanding that if you are here for hybrid, that there's a possibility that it could go 100%. What we experienced in the spring was crisis learning. Teachers were not prepared to go digital. Students were not prepared to learn virtually. And families were certainly not prepared to support their students learning virtually. And it's really kind of important that we understand this, because during that time, and even now, we're really experiencing this time of uncertainty. I was just talking to a student today in college, and he's at home and he's like, this is not how I thought I was going to be starting off college, and I just have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow versus 2 months. And so we're all kind of experiencing this feeling of uncertainty, and that really kind of causes a little bit of trauma, this persistent trauma. And it's really hard to bounce back when you're having persistent trauma. I saw a webinar a couple weeks ago from Dr. Celine, and she talked about this. And she also mentioned that 71% of parents reported that they were overwhelmed in the spring. And we know now that clinicians are actually reporting greater levels of despair and hopelessness, higher levels of anxiety, and possibly depression. The other thing we know is that our kids hear everything, and they are worried too. And we're hearing that as coaches, that kids are worried. And so what we want to do as coaches, parents, adults, teachers, is we want to shift our language. We want to make sure that instead of saying I worry, that we're saying I wonder. And that is something that we can do to kind of maybe, show the kids that, like, yes, we're wondering about these things too, but we don't have to use the words I worry. And then lastly, there were some things that were successful in the spring. I'm sure if there's, you have to think of something. And we want to make sure that that is the foundation for this year. So use the success that you had, no matter how small it was, and have that as your foundation. Lastly, before we jump in, I want to mention that what kids could do pre-COVID is not equal what they can do now. Their skill set is different. And so we have to be aware, and we have to set our expectations so that they're different from what they were previously. So.
Thanks, Krista. Yeah, so I'm going to pick up on some of the pain points. Krista kind of mentioned a couple when she asked some questions, but as coaches, we heard, both from students and parents, right? Some of these pain points from last year, the spring of last year. And so one of the pain points we heard a lot about is kids saying, my parent keeps nagging me because I want to do my homework, on the floor, or my parent keeps nagging me because of, right? And then we heard from parents, well, I'm trying to help my student create a plan, create a schedule, and they just don't do it the way I'm suggesting. Or my student takes an awful lot of breaks, like they're not, how can they possibly get something done? Or even my student wants to listen to music, like how could they get anything done listening to that type of music? So one thing we hope to help you see in this webinar is how to create that successful work area, and realize that what our kids need in order to get things done isn't necessarily what we need in order to get things done. A biggie for all of us was our kids were resistant to doing schoolwork at home. They were frustrated that they were schooling and having to do schoolwork in both the same environment. Many of them thought they were getting piles and piles and piles of schoolwork from the teachers or homework from the teachers, when in reality, they weren't getting more homework. It was just that they were having to do school and homework both at home. So, and home also kind of for many of our students is kind of this safe, snuggly relaxation spot. So to get into that school mode was really hard for some of those kids. But also the kids are resistant to doing their schoolwork at home. It was because a lot of teachers were posting assignments on Google Classroom, assuming that our kids knew what the assignment actually meant, the steps they had to take to get that assignment done, and the different materials they had to gather in order to do the assignment. And on top of all that, figure out how much time it was going to take. So tonight, we'll go and teach you about that get ready, do done to help your students plan. Because without a plan, most of our students can't get started, or many of our students can't get started. And I think regardless of whether it's distance learning or you're at school, a lot of kids we work with, when we ask, how do you study? They said, oh, we just reread the notes and reread the chapter, or we do fill in the blank study guides. So we find that regardless of whether you're learning at home or in school, that many students don't know how to really study. And so we're going to give you some tips of how to study beyond just the study guides.
Thank you. So like Christine mentioned, many of the calls that we received in the spring were, hey, I'm trying to help my kid. I'm giving them some of the things that work for me, and it's just not working. And one of the things that we've seen, or I've seen a lot of chatter about, especially on Facebook, is how do I create the most successful workspace for my child and or my children? And, you know, it's not a one size fits all. Because we're all unique, that means that we all end up using unique workspaces. Some of the things that we should be considering is, do I have a child who needs noise to work? Like that noise actually helps them focus? Or do I have a child who noise can be bothersome? Is the desk the perfect workspace? Or is alternative seating, or even maybe a mix of both? Should it be a high traffic area, like a kitchen or a dining room? Or it needs to be somewhere where there is no traffic happening. And then before I kind of get into some of the examples, I'm just going to give you my opinion. And I realize that all families don't have the flexibility to do this, but if you do, please try to avoid the bedrooms. And there's a really important reason for that. And I often tell students, it's really confusing to their brain when they try to do work in their bedroom. And that is because, are they supposed to be chilling out, sleeping, or are they supposed to be working? And having that space combined, just like how they were experiencing in spring, where home and school were kind of the same thing, that bedroom can be kind of the same scenario. Also, as your child gets older, it's easier to fall into distractions if they're working in their bedrooms. So I'm going to start off with a young man here. He's sitting in a traditional workspace. He is sitting at a desk, and we have his laptop and a lamp on the desk. We always want to make sure that the workspace is as clutter-free as possible. And that's because we tend to work better when our workspace isn't cluttered, but also because that's less to be distracted with. So that's one of the reasons. You can see to the right, we have a cart that has all of his work supplies on it. I love these carts. You can get them from Michael's, you can get them from the dollar store, all different kinds of places. And we'll give some different opportunities as well, not just the cart, but that keeps everything off of the workspace so it's not cluttered. But it's also good for another reason. You know, have you ever sat down with your child to do work and it's like, oh, I need a pencil, and they disappear and they go to find a pencil. They get back, oh, I need a ruler, and they're gone for another 20 minutes. By having all of the supplies on the cart, they can get started on their work and do less disappearing. We have a clock here, analog clocks are great, and it really helps see the passage of time. A lot of our students are going to have, we're going to have expectations where they have to be signing on and signing off at different times. So having that clock can be helpful. And then a posted schedule, I think that because times are going to be slightly different depending on where you are in the country or world, that we want to make sure that the students know where they're supposed to be and when they're supposed to be there. Here we have a different kind of workspace. We have an individual who's actually just kind of chilling on the pillows. They have their laptop there. And here we have like a caddy, and this is the best time of year to get kind of those shower caddies to put stuff in because we have so many kids going to college, but that's another great option. It could be a basket. It really can be anything. But alternative workspaces are really good for some individuals. We've had students tell us like, hey, I do better when I lay on the floor and just have a pillow and my notebook and my laptop. Like that's what works for me. And so we want to make sure that this space works for that student. I have one parent in particular who has 3 kids, and I love this system that she has set up after the spring where she's actually going to have different workstations throughout the house. And so each child will kind of rotate through those workspaces throughout the day so that they're not sitting in the same space all the time. She's also hoping that just gets the kids to kind of get out and about and kind of, just maybe that change in location will kind of help keep that motivation going. And here we have that clock too, but again, that's not necessary, but it's always nice to have. Here we have another individual who's using alternative seating. Here he is on a beanbag chair, and this time he has headphones on and he's listening to music. And I know that there are some people out there that just don't understand how some people can work with music, and I get it, but it is true. We do have individuals that actually can focus better if they're listening to music. They say that it helps quiet the mind so that they can focus. We have the cart with all the supplies, and we also have that whiteboard that has the schedule there as well. Next, understanding that all families are not going to be able to have that flexibility to have different workspaces throughout the home and might have several children. We have 2 siblings that are working in the same workspace. The young guy to the left is on a yoga ball. They're great. Again, we understand it's not for everyone. Sometimes the ball ends up across the room, and we get that. But he's also using a caddy with all of his supplies. His sister at the other end of the table is working on her, her schoolwork, and she has a pair of headphones on. Now, we don't know if she's listening to music. She could just be listening to a white noise track. Or it's possible that she's doing synchronous work while her brother is doing asynchronous work. And then we have a stand in the middle of the table, and that can have the schedule on it. I love these plastic stands that you can purchase at Amazon. They look like this, but I used it like this. You can see here how I just printed off the schedule, slid it in, and then I can put it right on the table and it's visible to the kids. So these are some of the spaces that I wanted to introduce you to. Now, this space I saw on Facebook, and I really liked it. I thought it was very creative for this parent. You can see here where she had a trifold, and she had another sibling across the table that had the trifold as well, has a calendar. Calendars are awesome. She's also had her pencils. The only thing I probably would change, because it's a little cluttered for me, not everyone, but for me, that would be a little bit cluttered, is I might move the pencils into the caddy and then move the caddy off of the table. But this is another great opportunity for us to be creative and set up workstations for multiple kids in the same area. Okay, Christine.
Okay, let's talk about backwards planning. Again, if the child doesn't have a place or a good image as to where he or she is navigating toward, it's very hard for them to start their work. So Krista, can you go ahead and turn the slide? Thank you. So this was developed by Sarah Ward and Kristen Jacobson. They're both speech pathologists, and it's called Get Ready, Do Done. And again, it's The premise behind it is you plan backwards and then you work your plan. So it gives us a really good idea of where we're headed, and we're going to actually go into each individual color along the way. So let's start with done, which is number 1. So for number 1, done, let's say your child has been given a poster or for a history assignment. I just picked this one for Daniel Boone. Again, a lot of assignments, especially when they're distance learning, are just kind of put up into the portal, whatever platform your student is using. And oftentimes teachers will attach a rubric and say, go for it. They won't necessarily break an assignment down for your student, or they often don't even give examples. So if your student is having a harder time trying to create what the assignment is actually supposed to look like, please reach out to your teacher and ask for an example. For some of our students, it's not second nature for them to automatically generate this idea for themselves. If you don't have an example, have them actually make a sketch of what the poster is going to look like. So for this poster, we know that it needed 2 different captions, right? One when Daniel Boone was a child, one when he was an adult. It needs 3 pictures. It needs some words to describe him. It needs his name and his dates. And your child could actually just sketch that in the red area so that they know all the different parts that their teacher is expecting. Also, make sure you keep the rubric front and center, because if you notice, everything is mounted on light blue construction paper. And so on the rubric, it probably would say, make sure the captions and the pictures are mounted on a different color construction paper before they go on the poster. So you want to make sure you've captured all those details. And by talking with your child about what done looks like, you can gauge his or her understanding of the project. Now, we take that finished product in mind, and then we say, how do I get from point A to point B? How do I get from this project that's just written out saying I need to do this project to actually getting it back to the teacher? And that's where the steps come in. So you and your student would work, list all the different steps based on what that done picture looks like of what it's going to take to get to done. So we're working the plan backwards. We have the done image. Now we're creating the steps that it's going to take. This is where we can set some time to doing the different steps. So if we have step 1 would be to lay out the poster board, let's say, to gently sketch in where the pictures are going to go, or where the captions are going to go. Or step 1 might be trying to find a picture or a caption, right? So we can help their kids actually put time to that. Let's say we're going to give them 20 minutes in order to be able to do that. So we want to then ask them, okay, where's the halfway point? Halfway point would be 10 minutes from now. And that helps students gauge whether they are on pace or on track for completing what they need to complete within a certain amount of time. Now, a lot of our students, or many of our students, don't love timers. So you can get creative. We've actually created playlists because, believe it or not, songs are about 3 minutes a piece. So you can get creative as to how your student is going to see that 20 minutes. You can actually color it on the clock. You can use a timer. You can use kitchen timers as well, but if they're digital, it doesn't show the passage of time as well. But you can use whatever is around. And so once we've written out the steps, we're going to go and figure out who needs to help us and what materials we might need. And so for this project, we need poster board, we need construction paper, we need markers, computer computer and printer paper, and we need mom to go, or dad to go to the store to get some supplies. So not only is it the physical materials that we're going to need in order to create the done piece, it's the people. So how many of you have had a student a night before, 2 nights before say, oh yeah, by the way, I need X. And you're like, oh my gosh, we're in the middle of a pandemic and I can't get you X. And especially if you have to bake X, right? So this is pre-planning, right? And all these steps, I should go back and say, all these steps are essential to do when the student first gets the assignment. Not when the student, is about 3 days out, but when the student first gets that assignment. So now we're going to work our plan forward. We're gathering our supplies. You can see the bottom of the yellow square is step 4. We're gathering our supplies. If you want to take us there, Krista. We're finding a place to work, and if we need a person, we're gathering that person as well. If there has to be some sharp tools to cut something out or whatever it might be, somebody's needs to cook something for a German class or Spanish class or whatever. Although I guess you wouldn't do that distance learning. But anyway, regardless, you would gather, you would ask the people for help, letting them know like, hey, I'm really gonna need help from you on step 4. So could you please, when I get there, can I come get you? And then we move into working the steps. Again, this is where we would set the timer. We'd get started with step 1. And then we would ask our student at the end of the time period that we've created, okay, so how did it go for 20 minutes? Do we need to adjust the time next time? Like, what do you think? Did you have enough time? Did you not have enough time? And here's where we can adjust for time. And as we then move through the steps, we're going to eventually end up back to done. And this is where the child compares their end product with how they sketched it out, making sure all the key components are in it. And I think it's really important to kind of talk to your child about what worked, what didn't work, what would you want to do differently next time. That's where the learning comes in. Most of the time our kids are so anxious to just, here you go, just take it, I'm done, right? And at some point, relatively soon after they, finish it, having a discussion like, hey, how did that go? Did you give yourself enough time to work through the steps, or did you keep having to add extra time as you went through? Did you like the type of timer you used? What did you notice about the steps? Did you work them in the right order? It could be anything. Again, going back to what Krista said, it's all about that curiosity. But please don't be afraid to ask a teacher for an example, because you and I do it, right? Well, maybe not everybody, but I usually only cook recipes that have a pretty picture, because I know then what my dish is supposed to look like. And it just makes it easier to navigate. The same thing happens in this system as well. So if you want to use this backwards planning just to have fun, please use it to have fun, right? If they want to make a pizza, have them sketch out the pizza, have them write out the steps that they need to take in order to do it, have them, write out the materials they need. Whose help are they going to need? How long does it all going to take? And then you can work it forward with them at the appropriate time of, moving from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. And then after you have the finished product, comparing that to your done. And I use this backwards planning with both the adults I work with and with students. Like, we can all use help breaking up tasks into incremental steps in order to get to done, and think through what are all those materials I'm going to need, right? And those people who have really good and strong executive function skills innately do that. It's like it's almost automatic. But for many of the students that we are working with, it's not an automatic response. And so helping them through this backwards planning can be can help a child actually get started because they actually know what they're supposed to do. So I'm going to leave it there, Krista.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really great, because one of the things that we also noticed in the spring was that we had a lot of projects that our students were doing. And so I don't know if it's going to be the same way this year, but you know, that backwards planning is a wonderful tool. So are you worried that your child doesn't know how to study? This is another thing that I'm always amazed to hear from parents is they agree with me. My kid's not being taught how to study. They don't know how to do it. And what is the number one way that students study? Anyone know? Christine mentioned it before. It's actually rereading notes, or the other option is rereading notes, rereading their text. And then the second thing that we hear is doing that study guide. And why this is important is because in the 1880s, there was a psychologist who did this study. He tried to memorize these nonsense words. And 24 hours later, he tried to see how many of these words he could remember. And he found that he could only remember about 30% after 24 hours, which means that he lost 70% of that information. In 2005, the study was actually repeated. And what they found was that this curve is the same today as it was back then with all material. And it's been replicated in different ways, but this was probably the one study that was replicated the closest. And so some people call this the learning curve, some people call it the forgetting curve, but basically what we know is that if information is not repeated over time, then we're going to lose it. And so I often tell a student, if you're not going to review those notes or that homework within the first 24 hours of learning it, you're only going to have 30% of it the next time you try to do something with that information. If they're to wait until they get that study guide, which is usually a couple days before a test, at that point they only know 3% of the information. And that means that they're taking all of this information that they're going to be tested on and they're cramming it into their short-term memory only to memorize it to take the test. And if you have a child who's older and maybe somebody who's younger, you probably have already realized that lots of information that our kids learn is just repeated. It's just expanded on as they get older. And so wouldn't it be nice if instead of having to relearn this information all the time, we build that foundation. Also, it's great when they end up going to college because they know how to study, and it makes life a lot easier when they're dropping down to having, instead of having weekly quizzes and a unit exam, they're now having, 3 exams the whole semester. So I love using dual encoding. This is one of the skills that we can use when studying. The other really big thing that we try to do with our students is we make sure that we tell them these are all research-based skills. This is not just something we're just telling you to study. There has been research that has been done to show that these things actually work. Dual encoding works really well because it's a combination of verbal and nonverbal information, which actually uses 2 different parts of your brain. But when we use those 2 different parts of the brain, we're creating a stronger neural pathway with this information. So for example, if we're learning something about a bridge, then we want to have a picture of a bridge. But it doesn't necessarily have to be something that means something to that individual. And we'll see an example in a couple of minutes. This is a doodle note. It's a fabulous tool to be using with students. Actually, I just sent some to a student that I have. And I really like it because we can do that dual encoding and it happens all at once, right? So we have the word. In their own words, they're going to describe what that word means. Then they're going to sketch a visual of it. And they can even go for the bigger picture using both words and the visual. But again, we're using both visual and we're also using the verbal, and we're making that combination of things. So here is another tool that uses dual encoding, and this is called a two-sided study guide. And I really love this for so many different topics. I have students that use it in math, they use it in science. You can see here, this was history. And this was used using doodle note stickers. And in your resource sheet, we're gonna send you a bunch of links for the doodle notes. Some are free, some you have to pay for, but it's something that we use a lot and I really like it. Here you will notice that the doodle doesn't necessarily go with the information. So for example, number 1 is what date did Japan attack Pearl Harbor? Well, the clipboard really, doesn't have anything to do with Pearl Harbor, but we have the date on it. We don't always have to have that visual representation be exactly what the verbal information is. And I always love to use this example. If we're talking about some of the earlier states in our country, and we were talking about the state New Jersey, I would use a tomato as my visual. Now, if you're not from Jersey, you probably have no idea why I'm using a tomato, but I'm from Jersey, and I know that Jersey tomatoes are the best. My mom always brings them to me every July. But anyways, so for me, that visual would mean something. That would mean New Jersey in my head. And so when I drew that on a flashcard or whatever, it would be easier for me to remember. So just having that activity of making some sort of visual with the written information can be helpful. Now, why I like a two-sided study guide. And the reason is because as a student is learning the information, they are taking the information and they are putting questions on a piece of paper. You can just see here where I just folded it in half. This is great because every week, this two-sided study guide can get longer and longer, but it's being used the whole unit. On the other side of the piece of paper, we get the answer. What a student would do with this piece of paper is usually about once a week, they would take the piece of paper, have it folded in half. This is the question. I know it's hard to see, but it's the question. And then they would take another blank piece of paper and they would write the answers on it. After they completed that, it's hard to juggle these two things at the same, is that they would take the piece of paper and they would open it so they could now see their answers, and now they could check the answers that they wrote down, dividing information so that we're able to divide what they know and what they don't know, because that's really what's important. Because what is the way that the teachers are checking to see if they know the information? They're quizzing them or testing them. And so it's really beneficial for a student to be doing that themselves. And so dual encoding is a great way to have a child study along the way so that they are learning the information, so we don't get to that point at the end of the unit where they only know 3% and they're relearning and cramming it all into their short-term memory. I heard this really interesting thing the other day. It was during a webinar. I'm trying to remember which person it was. And actually our working memory, which is part of the learning process, is actually decreasing because of the fact that we use multiple devices most of the time. Like, how often do you see like your child, or even you have your laptop open, you might have your phone open and you're checking something, you might even have a tablet. In fact, when I was listening to the webinar, I had my laptop open, I was listening to the webinar, I had my iPad where I was like jotting down notes, and then I think I was doing something on my phone on the side, right? So I had 3 devices going, and because we're spending so much time on these devices, we're actually starting to lose some of our working memory skills, which is memory in action. And so, we just have to be aware that anything that we can do to kind of enhance this process of learning can be really helpful for our families and our students. So, okay, so to recap, what we tried to do tonight was we tried to help you set up the perfect workspace. We also tried to help you, introduce you to a technique where you could get your kid to finish some work, right? Actually, the important part is actually getting them started and finished. But we've introduced you to that technique, and that's a fabulous technique. And then also we provided a technique and expanded on that technique on how to help your child study effectively. And these are all things that you can do at home. So are you still worried? Because I'm still hearing from parents that they are overwhelmed and they're worried. So would it be a relief to kind of have help in an affordable way? And I kind of mentioned this earlier. This was really our goal this summer, was to get together and develop some programs that could help everyone. And so we are calling these our Pandemic Umbrella Services for All, which is Success for All. And our goal was really to help everyone. So students do not have to have executive function challenges to participate in any of these activities. And you don't need to be the parent of someone who has executive function challenges to participate in these services. So we are going to be doing virtual study halls, at least 3 a week. It'll be a 1-hour session where your child will be supervised by an academic coach. And they can it's a perfect time for them to do their asynchronous or their independent schoolwork and be supervised at the same time, so that we make sure that if they get stuck, that we're kind of helping them work along. So that's one. We'll have skill building and accountability. So this idea was, we have students that don't need coaching, but they still might need someone to check if those assignments are finished. Again, we had a lot of parents telling us like, hey, you're coaching this kid, but I'm having trouble with this kid. And, I'm checking their homework and it's not completed. So what we will be doing in this, it's an hour and a half. It's going to be held on Mondays, because that is a day where I'm finding that most school districts are having an asynchronous work day. They will learn a skill each week, so we'll introduce a skill, and then I'll also meet with the students individually. You have the ability in Zoom to kind of have students go into a room where you meet with them individually, check their portals to make sure that their work is being completed, while an intern is working with the other students to have them actually complete some work. So it's really an hour and a half where we're doing a little bit of skill building, making sure that they've hit that submit button in Google Classroom or whatever other program that they're using, and doing their work at the same time. And this will be 1.5 hours a week on Mondays, and that is $60. So how about you guys as parents? I think that a lot of parents are trying to really navigate like what's happening in schools, maybe navigating a teacher who's not necessarily looking out for the best of kids. There's lots of teachers out there that are awesome and are working their butts off, and I know that, but there are also some teachers who are, and I don't think they're doing it purposely, they're just maybe struggling themselves, and virtual teaching is maybe not the best platform for them. And so we have parents that are struggling a little bit watching their kids struggle. And so we're going to be offering a parent support group that'll be twice a month, and that will be $50 for the month. And there'll be a topic of focus. So we'll always have some information that we're introducing you to, and then also plenty of time to troubleshoot, because we know that a lot of you will kind of need that. Study skills. So we briefly introduced you to a study skill. There is so much research and literature behind studying. It amazes me. I think I own 5 books now that are just about studying. And so we will have an 8-week course on study skills. It'll be research-based study skills that students will learn. It's over an 8-week period, and it'll be 1 hour per week, and the whole program is $400. And I'm going to have Christine briefly tell you about the Social Skills Book Club, since she will be doing that.
Yeah, so the Social Skills Book Club is for parents, and it's really aimed at very actionable steps that parents can do with their child, or their children that are having some difficulty with their social skills. And so it's for all ages, but we all know those kids that tend not to join in, or maybe don't get picked first, or invade space, or blurt out answers all the time. And so through the book club, we will be going probably 2 chapters a week, but really diving into how do we help these students. And part of this book, actually it was a teacher of mine wrote it, who, when I went through the family coaching program, is you will identify what social skills your child is struggling with most. And in the book, then you will go off on that track that will help you and your child develop, or help you to help your child develop those really important social skills that are just critical for success as your student goes on. throughout his schooling and then into the workforce as well.
And you're going to be doing that for different age groups, correct?
Well, I think we'll do the first one for all ages because I can combine all ages. If we get enough response, then we can break it up to maybe elementary and middle and high. But I'm confident that regardless of whether you have an elementary school child or a high school child in the same group, that we will meet everybody's needs.
Perfect. And then the other thing we tried to do, I have this little clicker that's sometimes working and sometimes not, so I apologize. The other thing we tried to do was kind of package it together, and so there could be some options. So for example, we have the parent and student success. That's a monthly plan for $400. It'll have that skill building and accountability, which is on a weekly basis, one virtual study hall per week. It'll have the parent support included, and then we will throw in a second study hall. So you actually have 2 study halls with that, and that is $400 a month. I forgot to mention in the beginning that if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. We'll try to answer as many as we can at the end. And if we can't get to your question, we will try to take themes and answer them. So I just wanted to mention that before I forgot. The second plan is a student total support success. This is 8 weeks, it's $1,200, and it's skill building and accountability. Again, will be held on Monday. We'll have the weekly study skills class, as well as the 2 virtual study halls, adding in that bonus of a third. So there actually will be 3 study halls. And right now we're trying to plan those study skills so that they're after school, which I know some parents are concerned about it being like even more virtual time, but we also realize that they're going to have virtual homework as well. And so we are trying to do that after school is finished. If we find that schools start to move things around, then we will try to be flexible and move those study halls around too. We then also are going to have that parent and student team success, both quarterly and for the semester. It'll include skill building and accountability, the parent support group, and the study skills for 8 weeks. For a quarter, that'll be $975. For the full semester, which is basically next week until mid-January, that'll be $1,650, and your child will also get the bonus of having that study hall every week. And then the parent success, which is going to be the book club, along with that parent support, and your child will be able to attend at least 1 study hall. That will be $400 a month. So the first 2 people that book from this webinar, we will offer a free 45-minute coaching consultation, and that can be about anything in relationship to ADHD, executive function, academic coaching, and some distance learning questions. So you will be eligible for that. Like I mentioned, our goal here was really just to expand our services to meet the needs of those in our community. And that's really what we were trying to do with this webinar and with the additional support. We just really want to try to help families survive this because we know that so many people are trying to juggle work or trying to, juggle work and parenting, and it's a lot. And so if we can help in any way, we want to make sure that we can offer that support. So,
Krista, somebody asked if this learning how to study will be individual or broken up by age groups.
So it's going to be a group, and we will, if needed, we will break it up by age group. So, I would say we obviously can meet the needs of younger children and older children, so we can do that. So that's not a problem. We will try to group kids together in their age ranges. So that will be our goal. The goal is to teach them the skills and then also to help them apply it to what they're learning. So that will essentially be the goal of the program. So any other questions that we can answer for anyone?
It can be about what you heard tonight, or like if you're running into an issue already, or you're predicting an issue.
Pick our brains, please. Okay. If not, if you think of something afterwards, don't hesitate to send me an email at krista@connectedpathwayscoaching.com. Our pandemic umbrella services are already posted online. We're really getting excited about school starting next week, so we're looking forward to that. And if anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to ask us. And we really wish everyone the best during this time. So please stay healthy, as well as survive distance learning. So thank you so much for attending. And we will make sure in the next 2 days to get that information out to you with all of those resources that we promised at the beginning, as well as the recording, so that if you missed something and you want to watch it again, you'll have that opportunity. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.